Man. Alhamdulillah, man. Sulaiman, you're right. Sorry, Fadil, you okay? Okay, good to have you all, man. So, man, I hope you can all see the slide. Um, so, what I wanted to discuss today, as I think even AJ mentioned, that very often when we recite the Quran, we get a lot of things which sometimes might be a bit confusing. They actually start making a little bit more sense. So I wanted to do something really simple and quite straightforward. So nothing particularly complex today. Nothing too deep like we usually do. But keeping it really quite basic. Just going through the bit in the Quran where Allah speaks about Ramadan, which I think is always going to be quite interesting. So essentially, just going a little bit deeper into what Allah says about Ramadan and the key things which we're meant to kind of be focusing on as well. I think those will all come up in there as well. And as we go through, if anyone has any questions, feel free to put your questions in the chat, or you can turn your mics on and ask your questions by just speaking as well. So the first verse, there's a bit of the Quran where Allah speaks about Ramadan, and it's a little section, and that whole section Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala dedicates just to Ramadan, what we're meant to really be achieving from Ramadan, and he kind of gives us guidance on the main focus points as well. And you'll notice that these are the main things which we've discussed over the last 10 days as well. And today I wanted to take it into the Quran, and then hopefully when we continue focusing on these areas, we'll know why we're focusing on them as well, because these are the things which Allah focuses on in the Quran. So the first verse, which is on the screen now, with a picture of dates and water to make you all hungry as well. Didn't think about that, did I? But anyway, so يا أيها الذين آمنوا كتب عليكم الصيام كما كتب على الذين من قبلكم لعلكم تتقون. This is where Allah just introduces the concept of fasting. So Allah actually refers to the fasting itself, which is what is ordained. Yeah. So I think one of the main things we take away, just going through the Arabic, so that we can have a quick understanding. Just going to go through what Ya ayyuhal ladhina amanu. This is Allah addressing us, addressing the believers. Kutiba alaykum as-siyam. Fasting has been made obligatory. Yeah, kutiba alaykum as-siyam. Fasting is obligatory. Kama kutiba ala alladhina min qablikum. Just like it was made obligatory on those before you. Yeah, so that's the introduction. And then Allah gives the main reason why we might even fast, which is لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَّقُونَ. Who knows the translation of لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَّقُونَ? I'm sure a lot of you know what لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَّقُونَ means. What's the main reason Allah gives for us to fast? Why do we have Ramadan? See, anyone? MashaAllah, thank you. Jazakallah Modi, man. MashaAllah, Modi's been studying Arabic as well, so I'm glad you got that, Modi. But لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَّقُونَ, لَعَلَّ is so that you guys تَتَّقُونَ can attain taqwa. Taqwa, what does taqwa mean? We've gone into this a little bit, haven't we? What does taqwa mean? The fear of Allah. That's a really nice summary. The fear of Allah, and we'll go a little bit deeper again into taqwa just to summarize it. But Allah here, He mentions that the main reason you get fasting is so that you can get this taqwa, whatever that is. We split taqwa into two parts. One is like as a mindset, which is to have an awareness of Allah, to have a fear of Allah, to know that Allah is with you, to know that Allah is watching you, to know that Allah is helping you. These are kind of in terms of a mindset how we understand taqwa. And when you have that mindset, this obviously affects your actions as well. Yeah. So when you have this awareness of Allah, it means that in Ramadan, when you feel like eating, you won't start eating and drinking, and obviously even throughout the year, whenever you feel like doing something, you'll actually think twice because you've got that awareness. Does that make sense to everyone? So that's how we kind of understood taqwa. That's very often the very first thing. If there's one thing which Ramadan is all about, it really is about taqwa. And just to go back to the verse, in the verse Allah doesn't actually mention the word Ramadan here, does He? We have the word siyam, kutiba alaykum siyam. That siyam is made obligatory upon you. It's the fasting, it's the abstinence, it's the staying away from food and water and your carnal desires. And that's what gives you taqwa. That's what allows you to develop that awareness of Allah. Because throughout the day, when usually you're just allowed to eat and drink and do kind of what you want, instead of doing that, now you're actually controlling yourself. So it's a continual practice of that control, of that awareness. Yeah, so that's why Allah talks about siyam. Then we move on to the next verse where Allah mentions أيام معدودات فمن كان منكم مريضا أو على سفر فعدة من أيام أخر وعلى الذين يطيقونه فدية طعام مسكين. So أيام معدودات, this fasting which you have to do is just for a few days. Yeah. Now this may seem a bit strange, but Allah here is actually addressing the people of Makkah. If you remember, the Quran was revealed many years ago. So this verse here, according to many of the experts of the Quran, doesn't actually apply today. It doesn't apply anymore. So before Ramadan was made obligatory, Allah actually made just a few days obligatory. So there were just some days in the year which it was necessary to fast. And what those days are, are different. But in these days, you just had to fast a few days. And then if you were ill, you could make it up. But if you could afford it, if you didn't want to fast, you were also allowed to make it up. Yeah, so وَعَلَى الَّذِينَ, so where it starts here on the second line, وَعَلَى الَّذِينَ يُطِيقُونَهُ, for those people who have the power, فِدْيَةٌ طَعَامُ مِسْكِينٍ, they can pay fidya instead of fasting. Even if you are able to fast, you were at that time, you didn't have to fast, you were able to give a fidya. فَمَنْ تَطَوَّعَ خَيْرًا فَهُوَ خَيْرٌ لَهُ, and if you can give extra fidya, that's good as well. وَأَنْ تَصُومُوا خَيْرٌ لَكُمْ إِن كُنْتُمْ تَعْلَمُونَ. However, despite the leniency that was there at that time, Allah still mentions that in reality it would always be better for you to fast. However, that leniency was there. Does that make sense to everyone? So at the beginning, there wasn't the strictness on fasting for the whole of Ramadan. In fact, the Muslims weren't even required to fast for Ramadan. But they had the leeway to fast for those few days, and if they didn't want to fast, they could pay fidya instead. So there was leeway at the beginning. Yeah, so that is important to know that this verse is there. So we're going in the order of the way the verses come in the Quran itself. So this is the first verse, that fasting is compulsory, and then there's this verse which is just a few days, and if you can't do it, you can make it up. And as we know, this verse obviously no longer applies today. But it's important to keep that in mind, that originally the fasting was just a few days, not 29 or 30 days, and also there was the leniency of not having to do it. And this is similar to many things in Islam. For example, even praying at the beginning, the Muslims, they would pray 2 times, and it wasn't obligatory. Even when alcohol was originally said to be bad, it wasn't necessarily to stay away from alcohol, but everyone was doing it, but there was the instruction which is better for you to stay away. So, for example, we know the Prophet ﷺ and the likes of Abu Bakr radiallahu anh, they never drunk ever in their lives. So basically the idea is that whenever somebody becomes a Muslim and starts to become more and more practicing, then there's always that idea of tadrij is the Arabic word, but slowly they have a chance to get into the religion, to get more and more. So again, we may know people who kind of are very distant from the religion, who aren't fasting every day, who may be doing lots and lots of strange things all the time. So if any of you have these people in your family or have these people as your friends, then obviously there's a method. Like if somebody's not praying at all, you probably wouldn't encourage them to get up for tahajjud time and pray then. You might not even be so forceful on them praying 5 times a day. You'd encourage them to start off with Anan, are you there? See, so you need to, if anybody is not on mute, you need to make sure that they're muted, please. So again, one of the things that we learn is that when something's in our religion, it applies at a different level to different people. So that's something when we're giving da'wah, when we're trying to encourage other people to become better Muslims and to become closer to Allah, you do have to look at where they are at the moment before you start preaching to them as well, because it's important to know where somebody is. And obviously when somebody becomes a new Muslim, there's the rules which are there. So just to keep that in mind, this is what was originally the rule. And then we've got this verse, which is where Allah now actually mentions the word Ramadan. So, based on what I've said, any questions? Or shall we move on to the next verse? Let me welcome the people who have come in as well. Oh, Brother Saad is here, alhamdulillah. Aisha Abdullah is here as well, mashallah. Sister Gulsan has arrived as well. Assalamu alaikum, all of you people. And Wissam's here. Assalamu alaikum, Wissam. Good to have you, man. Abdul Hafiz is here as well. I think Abdul Hafiz is at work. Wissam, how are you, man? Good to have you, man. Alhamdulillah, good to have you, man. So, if everyone can just mute themselves, so there's no interference. So now we've got that was just the first verse where Allah speaks about fasting being compulsory. And then Allah mentions the original ruling, which was there for the Muslims and again it's important to understand that when the Sahaba first became Muslims and they were still in Makkah and they were still getting used to this whole Islam thing, the rules tended to be lenient. And as they became more and more strong in their faith, the religion became more and more developed, more secure, and actually more meaningful as well in some ways. So we're actually quite lucky to have the whole diversity. But for those of us that are acting on the complete religion, it gives us a much more meaningful relationship with our religion and with Allah. Okay, so next verse. شهر رمضان الذي أنزل فيه القرآن. شهر Ramadan, the month of Ramadan, الذي أنزل فيه القرآن, in which the Quran was revealed. And like I said, this is the first time Allah actually mentions the word Ramadan. And what does Allah say first about Ramadan? أنزل فيه القرآن. He doesn't say fasting, he actually says Quran. Yes, someone there. So this is very. Yes, Imran. Yes, sorry. So it shows that how important the Quran is, how like intricately the Quran is related to Ramadan. Because sometimes we overlook that, and we'll go deeper on this. Let's get to the end of this verse. Let's understand the whole verse. I think it will put things into context quite nicely here. Because Allah says "Unzila fihi al-Quran," and then Allah doesn't now come to fasting. He still carries on talking about the Quran. He says "Hudan lin-nas wa bayyinatin min al-huda wal-furqan." Yeah. So Allah gives 3 descriptions of the Quran, and it's actually very interesting because at the point which Ramadan was became a part of Islam, the Quran was already well known. Everyone knew that the Prophet ﷺ was getting revelation and they would recite the Quran in their prayers, and everyone already knew about the Quran. But despite this, Allah here, He talks about Ramadan. The first thing He tells us is actually about the Quran, not about fasting. And then He doesn't just say that, He then reintroduces us to the Quran as if it's the first time we're ever learning about the Quran. So Allah says, Hudan lin-nas. The Quran is a guidance for all of you. وَبَيِّنَاتٍ مِّنَ الْهُدَى. And He has very, very clear signs in it. If you ponder over it, if you look into it. And I think Brother AJ started us off quite nicely today, really, by just telling us that one of the things he found most compelling was actually the fact that the Quran made so much sense comprehensively. And وَبَيِّنَاتٍ مِّنَ الْهُدَى. So it's got this clarity within it. وَالْفُرْقَانِ. And it allows you to kind of differentiate between what's right and what's wrong, what's guidance and what's deviance. So although as Muslims we already are in touch with the Quran, at least to some extent, we all know Surah Fatiha, we know some parts of the Quran, but Allah here reintroduces us to the Quran when He mentions the month of Ramadan. So when Ramadan comes, Despite the fact you already know Surah Fatiha, you already know that the Quran is 600 pages long, you already know there's 6,000 verses in there, you already know different parts of it to read, and you already probably know how to recite some of it as well. Despite all of the prior knowledge of the Quran which you have, Allah reintroduces us to it as if we don't know anything about it at all, which is quite profound really. So when Ramadan comes, it's time to get back in touch with the Quran as if afresh, as if we don't really know too much. And I guess what we've been doing for the past few days is really appreciating the importance of curiosity when it comes to our relationship with the Quran, isn't it? Because when if you bring a knowing mind, if you bring a mind as if you already know everything that there is to know about the Quran, then there's a sense of there's a limit, isn't there, to how much you can learn. But Allah here just says that the Quran is there. It's something that you should be approaching afresh, and there's so much guidance which can be taken from there. Is that okay with everyone? Any questions? Any input there from anyone? Or shall we carry on? Okay, so the next bit, فَمَنْ شَهِدَ مِنْكُمُ الشَّهْرَ فَلْيَصُمْ. So the first bit, Allah says, شَهْرُ رَمَضَانَ الَّذِي أُنْزِلَ فِيهِ الْقُرْآنُ. Allah talks about the Quran. Then Allah says, whoever finds the month of Ramadan, فَمَنْ شَهِدَ مِنْكُمُ الشَّهْرَ, whoever of you is fortunate enough to actually to be present in the month of Ramadan, فَلْيَصُمْ, then they should obviously. What's the most important thing that first comes to our minds when we think of Ramadan? Yasum. Sorry, fasting, absolutely. So فَلْيَصُمْ. So can everyone hear me okay? I've got a message telling me that my internet's a bit messy. Okay, that's good. If I do go off, please unmute yourselves and let me know straight away so I can change my connection maybe or something, because I just got a message about my internet connection. But anyway, Virgin Media, man, not TV fair. But anyway, فَمَنْ شَهِدَ مِنْكُمُ الشَّهْرَ فَلْيَصُمْ. So that Allah says here, whoever finds the month should fast. وَمَنْ كَانَ مَرِيضًا أَوْ عَلَى سَفَرٍ فَعِدَّةٌ مِنْ أَيَّامٍ أُخَرٍ. Those of you who are paying attention to the Arabic words here, you'll notice that this same verse, وَمَنْ كَانَ مَرِيضًا أَوْ عَلَى سَفَرٍ فَعِدَّةٌ مِنْ أَيَّامٍ أُخَرٍ. Whoever is ill and on a journey, then they can make it up another time. That same thing came in the last verse. فَمَنْ كَانَ مِنْكُمْ مَرِيضًا أَوْ عَلَى سَفَرٍ فَعِدَّةٌ مِنْ أَيَّامٍ أُخْرَى. So that same thing comes in both of the verses. But just to quickly bring the attention back to the verse before had a lot of leeway. It was أَيَّامًا مَعْدُودًا. There was a few days, and if you didn't want to fast, you could pay fidya. But here, we don't have that leeway. Now when Allah talks about Ramadan, He says, if you're ill or if you're on a journey, you're allowed to make it up afterwards. But there's no leeway anymore. Allah doesn't say that if you want to pay fidya, you can pay fidya. Now, as we know, that it's not really optional to fast in Ramadan. It's something which is compulsory. So we've gone from like an easy option, which was you can, if you don't want to fast, you can just pay it off if you can afford it, and it's only a few days, to suddenly going from a few days, like 4 or 5 days, or I think it was about 9 days at maximum, to fasting now being 29 or 30 days. So we've gone from what we call easy to hard, isn't it? Or we've gone from something which has a lot of leeway to something which doesn't have much leniency at all. So has it become easier or has it become harder? What's happened here? Has fasting become easier or harder? It's become, on the face of it, it's become more difficult, hasn't it? Absolutely. So the next bit which comes is Allah says, يُرِيدُ اللَّهُ بِكُمُ الْيُسْرَ وَلَا يُرِيدُ بِكُمُ الْعُسْرَ. Which in this context may seem a bit strange. Allah says, يُرِيدُ اللَّهُ, Allah wants ease for you. وَلَا يُرِيدُ بِكُمُ الْعُسْرَ, and He doesn't want difficulty for you. So that's a bit of a conundrum, isn't it? I mean, Allah says that before you have to fast for a few days, and if you don't want to fast, you can leave it out and just pay it off. And all of a sudden now you have to fast 29 days, and you're not allowed to skip it if you can afford it. And then on top of that, despite all of this extra burden, يُرِيدُ اللَّهُ بِكُمُ الْيُسْرَ وَلَا يُرِيدُ بِكُمُ الْعُسْرَ. Allah wants ease for you and doesn't want hardship for you. وَلِتُكْمِلُ الْإِدَّةَ, and He wants you to complete like a whole period. So how do we understand that? Does anyone have a go at answering this slight dilemma here? Yeah. Inshallah. So I think the easiest way to understand this is to appreciate the power of Ramadan. I think as Muslims we don't fast for Allah. We don't actually fast for anything external. We don't fast for anything beyond ourselves. Yeah, we fast for ourselves. And I'll just slide back to this picture here on the slide. The very first verse which Allah talks about is the reason you fast. What's the reason that we fast? كُتِبَ عَلَيْكُمُ الصِّيَامُ لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَّقُونَ, so that you get taqwa. Yeah, that's the reason that we fast. The very reason that we fast is to get taqwa. And taqwa is one of the most powerful things we can actually have in our life. Is one of the things which will make our life so much easier, if you think about it. What is taqwa? Taqwa, we went through what taqwa is as well. Taqwa is to have that awareness of Allah, and so that you can actually be in control. So now, even if you're fasting for a longer period of time, if your taqwa is at a higher level, it's actually easier for you to go through with them. And when you've got 29 days consistently, as opposed to just having 9 or 10 days, and now you've got 30 days or 29 days, you've got a longer period of taqwa training. Which means that it's more likely that your taqwa is actually going to be developed. So by the end of Ramadan, you're actually going to be much closer to Allah. You're going to have developed your awareness to Allah much more. You're going to be much stronger in terms of your taqwa. So, يُرِيدُ اللَّهُ بِكُمُ الْيُسْرَ, Allah wants ease for you, as in Allah wants to give you an actual proper opportunity to sort your taqwa out, to sort your relationship with Allah. He wants to give you a chance to really get in touch with Him, and make it so that by the end of the month, there's not much left to chance in terms of how much your taqwa is going to be developed. Does that make sense to everyone? Any questions? Okay, good. So that's and then وَلَا يُرِيدُ بِكُمُ الْعُسْرَ, and He doesn't want this hardship for you. One of the greatest hardships we end up suffering is when we're unaware of Allah, when we're disconnected from Allah, and we're kind of trying to do everything with our logical minds, with our physical bodies in the physical world. But when we get in touch with our spirit and we get connected with Allah, and we actually are able now to take the help of Allah, we're able to get in touch with Allah, life becomes a lot easier. So that's how Allah explains it to us. يُرِيدُ اللَّهُ بِكُمُ الْيُسْرَ وَلَا يُرِيدُ بِكُمُ الْعُسْرَ وَلِتُكْمِلُوا الْعِدَّةَ, and when you complete this period, وَلِتُكَبِّرُوا اللَّهَ عَلَى مَا هَدَاكُمْ, and eventually تُكَبِّرُوا اللَّهَ. This comes from the word takbir. When we start our prayer and we say Allahu Akbar, Akbar, the word kaf ba ra is to declare the greatness of Allah. لِتُكَبِّرُوا اللَّهَ, so that you can declare the great. When do we say lots of takbir? What day is the day of takbir? I'll go to the big field. Yes, Eid, absolutely. So at the end of Ramadan. Yes, Imran? Oh, okay. Yeah, true. But very close to Ramadan, straight after Ramadan. So just to, I think the reason Wissam might have got there is obviously because he's an Arab. He's got the context slightly easier. Just to help make a bit more sense for everyone, is Allah says, Allah wants ease for you, doesn't want hardship. وَلِتُكْمِلُوا الْإِدَّةَ, and wants you to complete the period, yeah, of 29 or 30 days. And what happens as soon as that period is finished? What day comes? The day of Eid, Eid al-Fitr. Yeah, so that's why I was saying on that day. Obviously, Imran's perfectly right. That in the days of Hajj we have a lot of takbir as well. But here, we're referring to that day of Eid. Where the day of Eid comes, and because you've completed the period, now you're able to declare the greatness of Allah because you're more in touch with Allah. You're more aware of Allah. So you declare the greatness of Allah because of the guidance which you've managed to attain by going through the month in the way. Does that make sense? And then finally, the last thing, the very last words of this verse, وَلَعَلَّكُمْ تَشْكُرُونَ. And the other benefit of all of this, the other benefit of Ramadan, the other reason we go through this whole process, the whole reason we're doing all of this, لَعَلَّكُمْ تَشْكُرُونَ. What does shukr mean? لَعَلَّكُمْ تَشْكُرُونَ. Thanks, good, gratitude. Assalamu alaikum Suhail Noor, man. How are you, man? Nice to see you, man. Alhamdulillah. Which Abdullah is this? I've still not figured this out, man. Which Abdullah is this below Suhail Noor? I'm not sure which Abdullah that is. But anyway, Assalamu alaikum Abdullah. Nice to have you. Brother Saleh, are you here? I don't think Brother Saleh is here. Anyway, no worries, man. So, لَعَلَّكُمْ تَشْكُرُونَ. Alhamdulillah. Who's that? Saleh? Oh, no worries, man. Alhamdulillah. Good to have you, man. I was just wondering, because I didn't get a chance to say salam at the beginning. So I'll just make sure you're here. Ah, thank you, man. Jazakallah. So the very last words here, لَعَلَّكُمْ تَشْكُرُونَ, so that you can have gratitude. And this actually, if you've understood the bit that comes before this, which is you have to do something hard, but in reality you get ease out of it. Again, Allah is speaking about what He's done here is made 30 days of pain compulsory, so to speak. But the whole point of it, as a result of it, you'll end up being more grateful because you'll see the fruits of it. You'll see what it does for you. You see how it helps you. So I think when you understand these last two words, the fact that Allah wants ease and makes it easier, and we'll see the ease in our lives, becomes a bit more clear as well. لَعَلَّكُمْ تَشْكُرُونَ. And also that brings a bit of awareness to why personally we've been focusing on gratitude a bit during this month as well. Trying to find those 3 minutes every day to ask the right questions, to get in touch with what Allah has given us. Because when we ask those right questions, when we are actually trying to see how what's going right and how we're getting closer to Allah, that's when we'll actually be able to notice all of these things. We'll be able to notice the increased awareness of Allah, the increased taqwa, and the increased gratitude which we have for all of these things. So I think the summary of that verse would be that fasting creates that gratitude in our lives. Fasting connects us much more deeply to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we learn to get this awareness of Allah. We learn taqwa. Yeah, so we learn on the one hand how to have an enhanced awareness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And at the same time, the awareness gives us that control over our lives. And of course, when we're able to do what we know we're meant to be doing, obviously our lives become easier, isn't it? That's kind of a given. So I think that's definitely something which is important to understand about the pain. Is that okay with everyone? Everyone's welcome. Just give you a few seconds. If anyone wants to ask any questions or just give a comment about what we've said so far, before we move on to the next bit, inshallah. And it seems everyone's following well, man. Alhamdulillah. And obviously fasting in itself creates gratitude as well. Yeah, لَعَلَّكُمْ تَشْكُرُونَ, this شهر رمضان الذي, and then at the end, just like Allah says fasting has been ordained, لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَّقُونَ. For those of you that can read Arabic, I'm just going to bring up this verse. The very last two words here, لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَّقُونَ. Fasting has been ordained so that you get taqwa. And at the end of this verse, شهر رمضان الذي, you've got Ramadan, you connect to the Quran afresh, and you fast obviously, and then you get this ease. And the reason all of this happens, لَعَلَّكُمْ تَشْكُرُونَ, so that you can become grateful, so that you can become aware of the blessing of Allah. So even Ramadan in itself, as painful as it is and as difficult as we may find it, and as much as we might have to exert ourselves to actually get through it, at the end of it we end up being more grateful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that's what we end up with there. Fasting actually does create that gratitude within us and an appreciation for our spirit, for our awareness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Yeah, man. So this is in Surah Baqarah. If any of you want to go through this again, at a later point, I think I've got the verse number. So it's verse 1-8. The first one is This is verse 183, 184, 185, and we're going to. This is verse 186. So 183 to 186 in Surah Baqarah. It's I think about 4 or 5 pages in to the second juz. So if any of you want to, go back to this and refer back to these verses, because obviously it is Ramadan, it might be nice to read through them again, and you can maybe read through the English. And even if you go online and you just type in Tafseer of these verses, I'm sure you. I should have really found. Hopefully by tomorrow I'll find a link to a nice little English summary. But if you can find, Surah Baqarah, the second verse of the Quran, chapter 2, verses 183, 184, 185 and 186. And Nu'man Ali Khan has actually got a really nice explanation on YouTube. He's kind of a specialist in the Quran, isn't he? So he's got a really good talk on YouTube, which covers this as well. It's very similar to what I've said, actually. I think the way he explains it, because I think it makes a lot of sense for the way that we understand Ramadan. And this is the next verse, which is actually really, really nice. I'm going to try and so I'll just go through the English of this, and then I want to actually practice reading it as well, because it's a really nice verse. وَإِذَا سَأَلَكَ عِبَادِي أَنِّي. Now Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He's addressing the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Those of you that understand Arabic, you'll be like, there's a second person narrative going on here. So وَإِذَا سَأَلَكَ, وَإِذَا and when, سَأَلَكَ ibadi. Sa'alaka asks you, ibadi, any of my slaves. So when any of my slaves ask you. So remember, the Prophet ﷺ is being addressed here. Anni, about me. Yeah, so those are the first 4 verses. Wa'idha, and when, sa'alaka ibadi anni, any of my slaves ask you about me. So when anyone asks you about me, basically, if anyone, is asking, how do we get close to Allah? How do we connect to Allah? How do we understand Allah? How do we understand our spirit? This is all a bit, confusing. Whenever anyone asks you, how do we get in touch with Allah? Allah says, فَإِنِّي قَرِيب. This is very interesting, because if you look at, if you look up to Anni, up to here, it's second person. Allah's addressing the Prophet. Yeah, and that's the question. Now, here's the answer, فَإِنِّي قَرِيب, which is no longer second person, which is very interesting. Because originally Allah said, if anyone comes along and they say, how can I connect to Allah, how can I be a better Muslim, and they ask you, then how do you respond? Then naturally, if you're keeping if you're wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi. Who was that? Hamdan, assalamu alaikum, how are you, man? Nice to have you, man. No worries, man. Alhamdulillah. Good to have you. Alpha is here. Good to have you. Abdul Quddus is here. Assalamu alaikum, Abdul Quddus, man. Nice to have you as well, man. You ran away. Why? No worries, man. Chill, man. Good to have you all, man. It's nice to say salam. We've got brother AJ here today, who's come for the first time. It's very nice to have him. And alhamdulillah, he's here as well. Just thought I'd introduce him to everyone. But we're just going through. What we've done today is do tafsir of the verse of the bit in the Quran where Allah talks about Ramadan. So we thought we'd discuss those verses, and now we're on to the last verse which we're going to discuss today, and we're just going through it. So وَإِذَا سَأَلَكَ عِبَادِي أَنِّي, Allah says to the Prophet ﷺ, whenever anyone asks you about me, so whenever anyone asks about how to connect to Allah, how to get closer to Allah, how to give up the illusion of control and trust Allah, Allah answers, فَإِنِّي قَرِيب, then definitely I am going to be close. That's the answer Allah gave. And the reason that's a bit kind of breaking off from the pattern is because Allah doesn't say, tell them that I'd be close. He says that automatically, even before they asked, I was already close anyway. The reality of the situation is Allah is always close to all of us. So, فَإِنِّي قَرِيب, I am close. Then Allah elaborates a bit. أُجِيبُ دَعْوَةَ الدَّاءِ, I answer the prayer. Da'wah this is the master. So any single dua which you make, any single supplication you make, da'i, anyone who makes dua. So it doesn't have to be like some proper pious person who wears a topi and a hat and is an imam or something.